Welcome to Hacking Your ADHD. I'm your host, William Kerb, and I have ADHD. On this podcast, I dig into the tools, tactics, and best practices to help you work with your ADHD brain. Hey team, this week I'm talking with Dez Rock, an entrepreneur with over 20 years of experience and currently who serves as the CEO of SIEMonster, a web security company. But today, we're focusing on her ADHD and how she believes it has made her into an exceptional leader. In our conversation, we discuss our experiences with ADHD and its impact on our lives. We also talk about the importance of deadlines, the challenges and benefits of ADHD, and also touch on the significance of routine. We also get into the need for our support systems, the detrimental effects of shame, and the value of sharing personal stories within the neurodiverse community. I had a great time talking with Dez, and I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. If you'd like to follow along on the show notes page, you can find that at hackingYourADHD.com/143. All right, keep on listening to find out how ADHD can guide your life in the workplace and beyond. One of the interesting things I found when I was reading your bio is like you have strengths in seeing the big picture and you see everything as an opportunity and thrive well under pressure. And I'm like, oh, that's classic ADHD.
That's
symptom.
Exactly right. I actually put that in there as clues. But all of that, everything you see there, if I didn't tell you I had ADHD, you should be able to work it out from my bio when I say work best under pressure. I see all fires, all fronts at all times, the level of multitasking. It's very obvious when you look for it, yeah.
I find, at least for myself, that the opposite is true as well. Like, there's no pressure, I don't thrive at all.
So, yeah, I think that's a very known thing, that time constraints like the pressure, because at the end of the day, it's a dopamine deficiency, right? Mm-hmm. So we'll chase that dopamine no matter how it is. And we normally chase it by having if you put a time pressure on us, then it's in our heads, whether we want to know it or not, everything becomes gamified. Now I've got to do it within 4 hours. And now all of a sudden I'm interested because I want to see if I can do it, right?
Yeah. It's the kiss of death when someone says, yeah, just get it to me when you can. I'm like, that's never.
Yeah, that's right. That's the worst thing to say. So I actually now know that I put timestamps and due dates on projects as well. You know, when I don't hand them out, I actually say this is when I want them by, because I think that's a general rule. If you do not put a due date, and it could be a 15-minute task and people will take a week to do it and will do your head in. You'll just be like, why, guys? It's 15 minutes.
It's amazing how it's so easy to put off those little tasks if they don't have a concrete reason to get done right away, or there's any reason that someone wants them right away.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. I think that's quite universal, that I think that if we all don't have a deadline, then we tend to stretch. We tend to internally prioritize it. But for us, ADHD folk, if you don't put a deadline on, it's not prioritized, it's lost. It's like, bye now, see ya, I'll never see you again.
Yeah.
Until you ask me and remind me that, oh, have you done this thing, or have you done, out of mind, out of sight. So the typical ADHD thing, I got up and I made myself some lunch and then I did X, Y, Z, and oh yes, I got to do some laundry and the laundry's right, then I do that. And then I do this and I do that. And then I came back to, and I thought, oh yeah, water bottle, that's right, I need a water bottle. Then I saw the can of soft drink that I'd opened up to have with lunch, also sitting there as well, that I forgot that I'd done. So I'm walking back now with 2 drinks. This is sound familiar. 2 drinks, like, oh dear, past me and present me are in a colliding decision-making course here. So I actually have both of them there now. So it's funny that now I look at all that stuff and think, oh, right, okay, so I know what's going on. For a very, very long time, unlike yourself who've had the diagnosis and the ability to settle with it, I've only had a diagnosis for a year. So everything is still very fresh and new to me. But at the same time, there's too many times where I'm like, oh, so that makes a lot of sense now.
That's absolutely, I hear so many people like after they get the diagnosis, they're just like, oh, that's what's going on.
And I wish I had have known earlier. So there was a famous comedian who did a Netflix special and she made a point to say like, I had ADHD when I was a young child. None of this like post TikTok ADHD people. And I was just like, wow. Oh, talk about gatekeeping, right? Like, what is that about? And I just thought to myself, you know what? I'm not in a place to be envied at all. I really wish I had parents who were switched on enough to be able to get me the help early enough so I could have handled this enough, because who knows where I would have been with the right help. Not to say that I didn't end up in a wrong place, but there is so much in my life that could have been easier managed as well. So this is not an enviable position, because I look back on my life and I think all all of those times where I'd been told I was weird or didn't fit in or just strange, all of that sort of stuff, that at least would have made sense to me rather than sitting there with like, I don't understand what I'm doing wrong. I genuinely don't understand. Or what do I need to say to appear normal?
Yeah, absolutely. And even now it's something that still exists. Like we have lots of times where we're just like, even knowing with my ADHD, I'm like, why am I not fitting in with this group? And then like looking back at my friend group and being like, all of them are neurodivergent too. How did that happen?
Oh, yes. And I say that to people now that who hang around me or like my company. This might be a red flag that you don't realize that if you get me or you think that I've said that to one or two friends as well to say like that, because I now understand that the non-neurodiverse people and I will never bond the way that neurodiverse people will bond. Because you and I will be like, I'll share my personal trauma. You'll share your personal trauma. It'll be too much information for the neuro beige, right? But you and I will be like, I get you now. I know exactly where you're at. And there'll be zero judgment on either side. And I suppose that's what the neuronormals will never understand.
Although I do find no judgment for the other person, but so much for myself all the time.
Even with other neurodiverse people?
Not necessarily with other neurodiverse people, but when I'm just like, even knowing my diagnosis, being like, oh, I should be doing this or that, being like, there's so many more things in my life I could do.
Oh, you're playing that game?
Yeah, it's not a good game.
No. I tell you what's a fun game that I play with my neurodiverse friends. I played this the other day with a whole bunch of when we sat around and I said, okay, everybody, best hyper-focus topic and the most useless hyper-focus topic, go. Because we all have them, right?
Oh.
The ones that led us down a path where it was just like, mwah, chef kiss, beautiful, I learned something, my mind expanded, and ones that you spent days, weeks, I don't know how long, and it's completely useless information that you probably never need. Go ahead, I'll ask you best and most useless.
I really like researching cryptids. Like Bigfoot, Mothman, urban legend monsters, not in a sense of, oh, these are real things that I want to know about, but I'm like, I want to know about the legends behind them because there's this incredible lore of this made up thing that people share.
So what's that fit under, best or most useless?
It kind of fits under both sometimes, but because what am I going to do knowing as much as I do about Mothman? Nothing, but also very interesting.
Right. No, you're right. It does fit in. So what was the one that was like one of the best ones that took you down a road that was just like, this was great? For me, it was smoked barbecuing, Southern barbecuing, right? I think I bought maybe at least two, if not three barbecues through that process. I went through the whole stage of, and learning how to cut a brisket. But for that one there, and it was a hyper focus, don't get me wrong, but it was one that my family really, really enjoyed because it would be, time after perfecting. Are you kidding me? I am sitting there trying to be the best pitmaster I can be and perfecting the taste of a good smoked brisket. That was brilliant. And also really useful now. Like I know how to do that.
Yeah. I had a similar thing with that where for my wife and I's last anniversary, we decided instead of getting each other gifts, we just get one gift for both of us that we both wanted. So we got a nice espresso machine. And so really diving into how to make good espresso at home. Enough so that recently when I was on vacation, we went out and picked up coffee and I'm like, I don't like this anymore because I make much better coffee at home now.
Okay, you probably can't see my assistant's face. Good thing she's not on camera, but she will be making faces right now because she knows how important coffee is to me and that I actually travel now with a coffee machine. So it's the same taste. But do you know what? That actually leans onto, and I talk about this is because it's the nature of routine. I'm very nomadic. I travel and in from a lot of countries and a lot of places, right? So the one thing that I like to do is keep this routine very similar, and that is wake up in the morning and have the same coffee because you cannot guarantee that everywhere you go. So I've found a way in order to do that, and it just puts that, again, small amount of routine, not that ADHD need too much. It's interesting because the travel, which would be chaotic and hectic to everybody else, calms me down enough to be very, very productive. The coffee, that is the standard, grounds me no matter where I am. I know it makes sense to you, but everyone else have to explain it in detail. Like, no, you don't get it.
Yeah.
I cannot risk a different tasting coffee because that's going to throw my day out.
I find really what's important for the ADHD is that, like, while routine is important, we can grow bored of routine. But what's more important is like this scaffolding of like, these are the places, like we'll have these touchstones throughout our day of this is how our day is going to go. And if we have those, then it makes everything else go smooth.
My theory is that I genuinely have a problem with neurodiverse, the label itself. I mean, sure, my daughter calls it neurospicy, which is something I'm more than happy to adopt. Because what that says is there is a normal brain and then there is one that is outside of that, and we call that diverse. Whereas I find that a very flawed science perspective. I think that for evolutionary purposes, without us, humankind wouldn't have gotten as far as it did, because I can tell you, anyone who's been fascinating within history, I'm talking about Da Vinci, I'm talking about Einstein, all of those people, guarantee you we're spectrum people, right?
Yes.
So there is so much to be said about the value that we add into our society. So to outcast us and say, hey, those are those weird ones over there in the corner, they're not like us. And this us and them mentality with, neuronormal brain and the neurodiverse brain, it just sort of tells me, it's like, no, actually, well, let me go one back. During the pandemic, when the sky was falling and everyone was chasing, were you calm as hell?
Most of the time, it was like,
right.
Yeah.
Every neurodiverse person I've spoken to said, you have no idea. When everyone else was panicking, you have no idea how calm I was, because it's like, yep, right. And it's funny. I believe, my theory, that is an evolutionary process right there. So when the sky is falling, you want us on your team. We are the X-Men, right? You want us on your team doing magical stuff while you're sitting there panicking, because that's go time, right?
Yeah, because we finally have enough stimulation in our brain to be like, this is what we're doing.
Exactly. And the world is a tapestry of all sorts of people, and we need all sorts of people.
One of the things that I've always come back to with looking at companies and stuff, it's like people like talk about diversity being like, oh, we need diversity. For diversity in itself is a value. If you're just coming from things in one viewpoint, it's going to be a problem.
Oh, the same. So if you have diversity, it's like you could have people of different colors, different genders, different whatever, but if they're from the same culture or they have the same thought process, like the same school, they've all graduated from the same school, from the same neighborhood, from the same community, there's no diversity. There is. That's not the same level of diversity as getting people from all different backgrounds, including neurodiversity. Because in neurodiversity, where do you reckon thinking outside the box came from? Us.
Absolutely. I just think back to the number of times in school where I'd like bring in a paper and my teacher would be like, I never thought of doing it this way.
Right. I remember when I told my daughter when she was really young, I said to her, Danny, you think outside the box. You know what she said to me? The best perfect answer, which tells you she's neurodiverse. She says, I'm in a box. To which I thought, damn, I love the way your brain works. I admire that. But to me, that's just like fascinating.
Kids are just so amazing with that kind of stuff too, because they don't have all the baggage of growing up. This is how you have to think. And if you talk to them, you go, oh.
Well, that's what school tries to do to them. School will try and make them, if they're quiet in the corner, they will have to speak up. And if they are too loud and too disruptive, they have to pipe down. School does a very good, or tries very, very hard at making us neurodiverse people as normal as possible, and fails miserably. That's why a lot of people struggle with school, because the structure in which school is done is not for our... School is a process factory. It's a conveyor belt of process. We are not built that way. So that's the one thing is that if you've ever failed at school and never been able to finish a degree, that has nothing to do with how intelligent you are. That just means that when it comes to that sausage factory, that was never going to work for you anyway. That does not mean you're not intelligent or you're not smart enough or you're not academic enough. It's just the way. It's kind of like the way you learn is different, period. And the way they deliver it is just one method. Stand there and just talk at you.
Amazingly, it's not even that effective for neurotypical people.
No, I mean, that's why they're taking notes. That's why they're recording. This is a common thing, right? And now even they're teachers are suggesting it's like, oh, maybe just standing there and talking for hours and hours is just too boring for everybody. So they're trying to change it up. Actually, there's one university in Australia that's really changing it up, because, the normal way of doing a college degree is like 4 subjects per semester and all that sort of stuff. And it's quite hectic because all your exams, all your assignments are all due at the same time. What these guys do, which I find very interesting, it's one subject intensely for 4 or 6 weeks, just that one subject. You focus, you do it, you get it over it, and then you go to the next one, and the next one, the next one. And if you need to take a break, you do, and then you go to the next one. And I just thought, brilliant.
Let you get in your hyperfixations and stuff.
That's right. And you focus in on that one subject, then you move on to the next and the next, the next. So rather than trying to spread yourself thin with 4. What I'm saying is there are ways in which we are changing it up, but the school has been an established institution, which, look, in evolution times, it's a very new phenomenon, like throwing kids into school, into this system, telling them to sit there between 8 and 4 p.m. and sit there and learn. And if that's not enough, now go home and do homework. Like, that's very, very new when looking at the scale of our human evolution. And I don't think anyone who thinks, well, that doesn't work for me should feel bad. It's like, no, this is a new process in which they're trying it on and it's not working in general.
School it's great because it does let you find out what you're interested in, but it can be very stifling.
What I found in my own personal experience and with my own kids as well is that it's about trying to change literal personality into a more effervescent, if you need to ask questions, you put your hand up and you ask, and you need to sit there quietly. You need to sit there, it's all training. It's all kind of almost like military training, right? So it's very much a training drill exercise of how you should behave as well. And if you were a quiet child or a quiet student who prefers to sit in the corner and read, you can be isolated or tagged as something not quite right here. Do you know what I mean? It's something we need to fix.
Yeah.
That's what I mean when I said that's a new phenomenon, because back in the day, I think you would just leave that person to be. But now they all have to fit in. We have to talk about the social life. There's all these other pressures as well on how we measure success.
Yeah. Well, and then it kind of leads also to what we were talking about before we started recording about how, you're a CEO of SIEMonster and how there's a lot of CEOs that are in the neurodiverse. And it's something where we don't want the people boxed in to become these CEOs because you need this out of the box thinking to kind of get there.
Right. I don't know if that's right. So it's a double-edged sword to say my ADHD is my superpower, because sometimes my superpower is my kryptonite as well, right? Mm-hmm. Only those who know will know. But I don't know if anybody else could do the job I'm doing under the pressure I'm doing it and be able to still perform as well and not be exhausted or burned out or anything like that. I get exhausted, but burned out and is not it at all. I'll thrive under pressure. And I suppose that's what you want. You want a CEO who can thrive under pressure, who can make decisions when the going gets tough. Because I'm in a startup, I'm a founder, right? So that's exactly my role. I can imagine that there'd be CEO, the cruisy ones, who are coming in 10 years, 20 years after a company's been set up and everything's been set up and you're just here to roll in, that's different. That's different. So that's not where I'm at. I'm at the point where I am putting out fires on every direction all the time simultaneously, wearing many, many hats. Like if I'm not doing marketing, I'm doing accounting. If I'm not doing accounting, I'm doing business strategy, and I'm doing all of this sort of stuff, one after the other. I'm doing that. So people ask me, how on earth do you do that? And I think the truth is like, I do that because that's the way my brain is wired. I'm like, well, it's a walk in the park for me.
Yeah. Whereas doing an actual walk in the park is much harder. The dichotomy of ADHD is so interesting, where we have so many things where it's just like, this should be easy to do, but I can't do it for whatever reason.
Oh, the other thing I want to point out too, to anybody listening, is that not everyone's ADHD looks the same as well, and nor should we compare ADHD. And this is what I'm going to refer to as the buffet table. And I will clump every neurodiversity into that buffet table. So whether it's bipolar, autism, dyslexia, everything that we have labeled, or society, Western modern medicine has labeled as diverse, right, is at that table. And there is no such thing as getting a set box menu. You go up there with a plate and put the servings of whatever your genetics has put on that plate, and then you walk away. So your plate will not look like anybody else's. So we need to stop comparing what our symptoms and how our treatments should be as well. Because I truly think that as we develop more onto this subject, we'll probably lose the individual titles as well. And then just look at it as diversity, like this is diversity. And then we manage your diversity, because then you don't need to have all of those subheadings under it, whether it's autism, whether it's ADHD, whether it's it's all just diversity, and it's all just levels of it. Because even if you have autism, it's a matter of how much of it. Even if you have dyslexia, it's a matter of how much of it. It's, again, the amount of serving size that you went up and served yourself with. This is like my caveat, right? If you're hearing a CEO and you're thinking, how come I couldn't get there? First of all, I did not do this alone. I would not be able to do this alone. If it was up to me, I would have failed miserably on my own, because I wouldn't have been able to carry anything through, by the way. Do you know what I mean? I wouldn't be able to finish a project at all. So I certainly need support around that. So that's the truth there. And I just happen to have this brand of ADHD, where, this is what I can do really well. And trust me, if we want to get to the darker side, I have parts that look really ugly and dark and awful that you probably do really well, I
do love the point you're making, that ADHD can be very beneficial if you have the supports in place to make it so, because it's so easy to be like, yeah, ADHD is a superpower. Also, I have someone that does all my cleaning for me, kind of thing.
That's
and it's
right.
like, okay, well, you're skipping over a really important piece where that would be what a lot of people go, oh, I'm really bad at cleaning my house, so therefore I can't do anything else. But if you have that support in place, it can make it so that you can thrive elsewhere.
Absolutely. I agree with that. We talked about before we hit play, the role of medication medication, and it's not just medication. And this is what you're referring to about all of the support channels that we can put in place, or the support tactics. And that's why your podcast is called Hacking Your ADHD, right? It's about finding ways in which we can support ourselves. And I got to tell you, like, for a long time, I was hacking my own ADHD without realizing what I was doing. Of course I was. That's what we do.
We're finding, ways to get around these problems that
for sure. For sure. I would ask one of my friends or whoever family member to come in every time I needed to go through my wardrobe. Why? Because I needed a body double. It's as simple as that. I hate packing. I detest packing. Look, it's a small thing. You throw, and people think you should get excited. You're about to jump on a plane. For me, it's just like, I cannot. So I will need a body double to get through that. So you're right. If I did not have support, if I did not have the ability to call up on all of this, my life, it would be how much more erosion, like how much sandpaper can I be rubbing up against? And how much would that detach from my ability to do other stuff? And that's the point you were making before.
Yeah.
Right. So if I'm struggling, like you said, with the house cleaning and the packing and this and that, all these small tasks, and I don't have any help and I have to do that, and I'm being constantly judged, criticized, ridiculed, belittled, how on earth then do I go and fix or finish a simple task that is something that I know I can? You know what I mean? That becomes monumental now.
Yeah. And it builds on itself too, because there's all the shame surrounded around it too. I haven't done my dishes in a week. Not only do I have a lot of dishes to do, but I also have to get through that shame of having not done my dishes for a week.
For sure. And the fact that you're even saying that, and I think that's really empowering, because shame is a bit like mushrooms, right? It lives in the dark and feeds on bullshit,
Absolutely.
And so the way to deal with this is to give it sunlight so it can't grow. And that is to talk about it. Because once you do, you wouldn't believe that the fears that were going to happen are not necessarily as big or as consequential as what you make them out to be in your head. I certainly know exactly what that feels like. Regardless of, we're connecting shame with ADHD and neurodiversity, and certainly we get our lion's share on that. But shame itself is not very useful or productive in any part of life. It's actually very debilitating in the workforce. Yeah. It's actually very debilitating in your personal life. And it's not a motivator. It's not anything. Despite what religion will have you believe, it is not the motivator, right? It is not the inspirational tool at all. It's very, very destructive on your soul.
Well, because it's the difference between shame and guilt, where you have guilt can be very motivating, where it's, I did a bad thing and I want to do it. But, shame being, I am a bad person.
I am a bad thing. Correct. Yeah, and that's a very good analogy. And I don't know if everyone knows that. And I think we should reiterate that again, that the difference between shame and guilt is?
That guilt is, I did a bad thing. Shame is, I am bad.
Yes.
And getting that difference is so important, because it's okay to feel guilty about doing a bad thing. It's okay to be like, I forgot to do the dishes for a week.
Yes.
That's not a great thing to do, but it doesn't make me a bad person.
Correct.
Because when we hit that shame where I'm like, I'm a bad person because I didn't do the dish. No, you're not. There's nothing moral about completing tasks. It's okay. You can just get back at it.
I agree with that. I remember when I was a young mother with several, children, and I remember there was just unspoken neighborhood pressure to keep a tidy house, right? Which is a nightmare for everybody, but especially for somebody like myself and with small children. And I remember getting, look, that's it. I'm actually going to get a cleaner. And I remember having this discussion with another mum in my community and just blurting out, because that's an ADHD thing to say, my dignity, my self-worth does not lie in the fact that I'm cleaning my own toilet. That is not where my value lies. Like, if I'm getting somebody else to do it because I can spend more time with my children or this, that, the other, then that's what I'm going to do, right? It was funny because, like, once I said it, I'd been sitting on that for so long. Once I said it, it was like, we talked about the shame and the mushrooms, right? But out it came, and it was just like, hot damn, I'm onto something there.
Yeah.
I'm onto something. It's like, this is crazy. Like, who cares who's cleaning the damn bathroom as long as it's getting cleaned, right?
Exactly. And then it goes back to, if you have the support to get these things done, you get more.
So that's right. And that always comes down to a point of privilege. Look, I know we always have to reiterate that. Yeah. Everything comes down to a point of privilege, whether you have the resources to do it. And by the way, resources doesn't also just mean money. It could be in friends, family. Support is also a privilege to have, because not everyone has them. That's
something we saw a bunch of during the pandemic, is people lost a lot of those non-monetary resources of having family to come help with kids and stuff. And so then we see people struggling more, and then we see this uptick in diagnoses because suddenly people aren't coping anymore.
Do you know that that's a very good point? I didn't realize that that was happening there, but that makes a lot of sense. You know, on the flip side, because one of my hyper-focuses was cults and religion, right? There was a lot of people who left cults or started to expand and think outside because they were not indoctrinated on a weekly, bi-weekly, tri-weekly,
that's interesting.
Yeah, because they weren't allowed to. So just being removed from that for long enough allowed the brains to actually think outside the box. I found that very fascinating. Yeah.
That is really interesting. Now I want to go read about that.
Nice. Lovely. I'll leave you with that.
Yeah, it is just really interesting how like you have these cascading effects from things where you wouldn't expect them to occur.
Right, exactly. So that was one that I didn't expect, but once you think about it, it makes total sense, total sense, like a removal from something that is telling you on a weekly, daily, whatever basis, because these cults will get you, like you're not supposed to have a life outside of that organization. And once you do, if your thought patterns start changing, but you might be in a cult if you've spent enough weeks away from it, and you start thinking, Well,
and it's important for us to think about because with ADHD, we're way more likely to fall for that kind of stuff.
So, yeah, except I hear that a lot, especially with autism, like they're more vulnerable with that sort of like, because they're so not gullible, but they're so much more innocent with their taking things on fact value. But at the same time, it depends if that's we're also the most inquisitive people as well, that we will chase down that rabbit down that hole as well. And in doing so, we will often overturn and find a lot of flaws. So I think that can cut both ways.
Yes. Yeah, I can definitely see being like the initial steps much easier to get into with ADHD. But then when you're in there, the ADHD also making it much more likely for you to get out.
Yeah, because I think that I tend to want logic in my life. And if I have not found that in reasoning, so if someone's giving me a story or, their side of the story and I'm not finding logic in their actions, that's a hard sell for me to think, I'm certainly going to follow along onto this. That's going to be a no for me, right? Because I tend to prize logic over reason, rationale. These are very high motivators for me. So belief, the wish, the faith, all of that sort of stuff, and just the blind faith, I leave that to the neurobeige. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're kind of coming up to the end of our time here, and we covered a lot of areas. Wasn't expecting to get into cults, but that's the fun part about ADHD. You don't know where you're going to go. Yeah,
in connection with the pandemic, that was a side effect. Because we talk about a lot of the side effects that happened out of the pandemic. Marriages broke up, relationships happened, children were born, all that sort of stuff. Lots of stuff happened. And I found that fascinating. But of course, it was reverting to the pandemic. And you were saying about how a lot of people discovered that they had ADHD because they didn't have the support. So I'm bringing it back home.
Yeah. But so I was wondering if there were any other things you wanted to get to before we hit our time.
I suppose the only thing I can add to this is that the journey, you're collecting stories, which is very valuable for those who are coming along to make sure that they feel seen and heard. So that's why I'm careful when I talk about, look, I stand up and say I'm neurodiverse because I have children who are neurodiverse. So I have an obligation and a duty to become a role model. And I'm not going to hide the fact. I'm not going to deny it. Because that's shame. That would be a shame thing, right? So I don't want to do that. So at the same time, I'm very careful about saying, well, I have this neurodiversity and I have achieved X, Y, Z. Like I finished a uni degree. I went on and went into law and all that sort of stuff, right? So that's not fair for me to say all of that and make anybody else think, well, why couldn't I, right? So the only thing I want to add on is that, like I said, just we all have a different serving and we all have capabilities that are different to everybody else's, and you cannot. We're all taught to not look through Instagram because it's the highlight reel of everyone's life. We need to learn to do the same with everybody else's diagnosis as well. It's not a one-size-fits-all shop, and if you're feeling like you're struggling in one area but no one's understanding you, this is why the sharing of stories is so important, because you'll get to hear something, that's similar to yours. If not, then stand up and tell yours, because I guarantee that there's someone else is going to resonate with that too.
Absolutely. All right. Well, if people wanted to find out more about you,
you can find me on Twitter under Distraction. Isn't that ironic? I gave myself that. Of course I did. But isn't that a clue? That was 10 years ago that I made up that Distraction with a Z, D-E-Z, traction, right? And LinkedIn, if you're into that as well, under Dez Rock.
Awesome. Well, I had a great time with this conversation, and thank you so much for coming on and talking to me.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for sticking with me all the way to the end. And thanks again to Dez Rock for coming on the show. Before you go, though, let's do a quick rundown of the top tips from this conversation. 1. Build routines and establish touchstones throughout the day to provide structure and support for productivity. While some routines can become boring, having a basic framework can help us stay on track and maintain a sense of stability. 2. We want to surround ourselves with support systems, including medication, routines, and other strategies tailored to our individual needs. We can also reach out to friends, family, and other members of our community for help in overcoming many of our ADHD challenges. 3. We need to understand that neurodiversity is not a one-size-fits-all concept. Each person has unique strengths and challenges, and it's important to avoid comparing ourselves to others. We can celebrate our individuality and focus on personal growth and well-being. That's it. Thanks for listening. I'd love to hear what you thought of this episode. Feel free to contact me over at hackingYourADHD.com/contact. If you'd like links or to read this episode's transcript, you can go to the show notes page at hackingYourADHD.com/143. If you'd like to support the show, the best way to do so is to tell someone about the show, especially if you think a particular episode would resonate with them. Just click the share button on your podcast player. Or you can consider supporting me on Patreon. Just go to hackingYourADHD.com/Patreon to find out more. And now for your moment of dad. One crow joins another on a power line. It was an attempted murder.